I screwed up this video. There, I said it. I screwed up this video. I need a new profession. I got this 2055 and I was told it did not run, and it didn't. So I had a whole nice video to see why a locomotive doesn't run, and I deleted the whole thing. So it runs. I know it runs because I got it to run, but I'm still going to go through the checklist that I always go through with all my locomotives and point out what actually was wrong with this one and why it didn't run. First, we check the wiring. Then we check the brush plate, the brushes, and the armature. Then the bearing plate. Then we check the E-unit. And once you go over all of those, you'll be able to figure out why the locomotive doesn't run. Let's start with getting the shell off on this one. So in the 2055, it's 4 screws. There's 2 at the front, up here underneath the front trucks, and 2 at the back. 1, 2. Now this one, when I got it, it only had 1 screw at the front and 1 screw at the back. So I had to go through my spare parts box and replace the missing screws. So with those screws off, the shell will just lift up. And then you have to unhook the little drawbar from this space here. Okay, so when I initially opened up this locomotive, the brush plate, armature, and brushes were absolutely filthy. Before we get to that, let's stick with our checklist. So now that we got the shell off, we're going to visually inspect the wires. Make sure all the connections are there. Make sure there's no bare spots, especially when we're dealing with original wiring, that it's not cracked or damaged, and none of these are, except for this one, and I'll get to that in a second here. Now, this connection is a little bit sketchy, but it's still there. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. That can be another video where I replace the headlight wire. But everything looks good there. Coil is connected on this side. Coil is connected on this side. So visually, everything looks good there. Next, we're going to go to the brush plate. So we remove these 2 screws, and we're going to inspect underneath it. So these brushes are just sitting in there, and they will fall out on you. Now, when I first got this and took off the brush plate, the armature was absolutely black, and this side of the brush plate was filled with carbon. So it was completely gunked up, and I was running it last night for quite a bit, so it's got a little bit of carbon buildup on it again. Not bad at all. I don't really have to clean that, but I'm going to because it's right here in front of my face. And while we have the brush plate off and we're working on the armature, we get a little toothpick and we clear out these little slots if there was any gunk in them. And they're totally clear. You can blow out some of the residue if you did find some, either like that or with an air gun if you got it. So that is taken care of. Next, we address the brush plate itself, and all I'm going to do is just get a rag, and I just wiped off the excess carbon, just like that. There's still a little bit there, but that's perfectly fine. Next, we cut a little sliver off of the scouring pad, and we can twist it into these brush holders. Again, blow out the residue. We don't want any green flecks in there. Next, we'll look at the brushes themselves. They are in excellent shape still. And again, since I ran it yesterday, of course, there's a little bit of buildup happening. That's Nothing to worry about at all, but we're taking it off because we're here. So we're going to seat the brushes back in. Oh, and you can also check the tension on these springs in here. If the brushes just drop right in and they go right to the bottom like that, the springs are shot, but these don't do that. That tells me the springs are nice and springy, doing the spring things that they're supposed to. Okay, and actually, before we put this back on, I do want to point out, this here is a washer. It's a good idea to take it out, maybe just get a little bit of oil on it. So there we go. That is going to take care of this side. Oh, and you can drop a little bit of oil down on there, which I already did last night, so I'm not going to do it again now. And we just drop the whole thing back on. And we've got this little notch here in the top of the plate. It's going to seat right into here. There's also a notch right here and a space or a hole underneath that side. And you'll feel it kind of snap into place. Drop in our screws, tighten them down, and this side is done. The armature was absolutely fouled up with carbon. The brushes were filthy. The brush plate on the other side was filthy, which of course meant the brush holders were also a little bit dirty. That was taken care of, and we've taken care of it again now. On to the other side. So this is the brush, or not the brush plate. This is the brush plate. This is the bearing plate. When I first took the shell off and first looked at this last night on the deleted footage, this bearing plate was absolutely bone dry, which is going to cause problems right away. So we took it off, and it had a lot of metal wear material, which it will eventually because all of this is spinning against it. But it had quite a buildup. It was bone dry, so it definitely would have held up the motor a little bit, not being lubricated properly. So we wiped off the excess, and as I've explained before in multiple videos, I usually soak these things overnight or for a couple days in motor oil. That gives the material this is made of a chance to absorb some of that oil, because it does act kind of like a self-lubricating bearing. So once that's lubricated, we'll drop a little bit of oil onto the shaft on this side, just like that. So this is already oiled. Now that's oiled. Now these gears were absolutely bone dry as well. They had no grease on them whatsoever. So I just put a little bit on a few spots along the gear. Put some grease on these gears as well. And then when I put the bearing plate back on, like so, and tighten it down, we'd spin the wheels to spread that grease on the rest of the gears. So just spin this around, spread the grease all over the gears, and that's perfect. Now while it's upside down as well, we're going to have a look at these axles, and they were also bone dry. So basically the reason this didn't run was because it had no lubrication. The wiring was all fine. The brush plate and brushes, even though they were fouled, they still would work. It wouldn't be great, but it would do it. But when all of this is dry, it's just going to bind itself up, or if it's caked with really hard grease, the motor just can't move the wheels that way. So once this was all lubed up and cleaned, lubed up the axles as well, this thing took off like a bullet. So that's all it really was. But for the sake of the original video that I lost, we're going to continue with the checklist. So we checked the wiring, we checked the brush plates, we checked the bearing plate, lubed up the gears. Pickup rollers look good. They're not worn out at all. Still making good contact, still have lots of spring. The next thing to look at is the E-unit. So what we want to see on the E unit is we want to see that the drum underneath is clean, that the contacts are clean. So on this locomotive, the screw is way under here, and it's just one slot head again. That's free. Now we also need to take off the smoke unit as well, because the brackets or the frame of this E unit extend under here. So there we are. There's the plunger. Now we can pull out the E unit and have a look at it. It's way too much oil on that. So what we're looking for on the E unit is right here, this drum. And what we want to see, there's a copper strip here, and if we flip it around, there's another one there. Those copper strips have to be clear so that they make contact with these little fingers. So there's the copper strip, there's the two fingers, and there's 4 more up at the top. They're way in there. And they all make a contact on this drum, which controls the direction of the train and actually controls whether the train is going to move or not once the E unit gets power. If they're too fouled up, the train's not going to go anywhere because it's not making a good contact. So what we want to do is we just want to clean them off, basically. And usually it doesn't take too much to do that. A little Q-tip. You can put some contact cleaner on this if you like. Again, I still use it dry. And just wipe off all the copper bits. The sides here don't really matter as much as this piece, but I do them anyways because you're here, right? You've gone this far, might as well go all the way. And that was another issue with this locomotive, was this drum was really, really dirty. So it wasn't getting a good contact. And if you need a little bit more power, I would use the scouring pad, not sandpaper, because there's not a lot of material here, and you also don't want to damage those fingers. Because if you do damage the fingers, you're just replacing them. That's about the only fix. So I'm happy with that. It looks great. So we're going to drop the unit back in. There we go, nice and tight. So that's all back together. Now, another problem that this had was the smoke unit. So the original smoke unit that came with it was busted. And I don't know if I have something here that, yes, I do. So I'll show you on a spare part that I have what was wrong with it. So these are the smoke units. This is what you see when you lift up this cover, is this little heater element here. And basically what it is, it's a very fine wire that's wrapped around this ceramic block. And like this one, the original one from this locomotive, the wires were broken. So there was no way this was going to work again. So I did have a working replacement. However, the reason it was a replacement was because the wire was shorting out here on the cup. So the wire is bare underneath here, and it was touching this metal cap thing and shorting out the whole train, basically. So as a temporary fix, I just wrapped some electrical tape around it and put it all back together, and it's been working fine ever since. Now we can do a little bit of a better repair on this, and we can take care of that right now. So the wire just actually slipped through a little hole. And I'm going to lift this out very gently because there's those wires I was talking about. That's actually the element. And you do not want to break those. They're very, very fine, very delicate, very easy to damage. So you want to lift this up as carefully as you possibly can to get that out. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take off this repair and do something a little bit more secure. So as you can see, there's the bare wire that was touching the metal cap and causing a lot of problems. I'm going to carefully lift up this grounding tab because it's been moved quite a few times and it could potentially just snap off. So you want to be very, very careful with that. We're going to pop this back out of the cap, like so. And we're going to try to feed this wire through a little bit better. And the insulation. Without damaging this wire. But right now we've got insulation all the way down to the base. It's good. When it touches this cap here, it's not going to short anything out. So I can go ahead and I can reconnect these two wires. So I'm going to do that right now. So first I'm just going to twist them together and then hit them with some solder. And that will finish this connection. So just let me heat up the soldering gun and we'll get to that right now. There we go. So now we got solder all the way around it. Now I can just wrap that up. So you can get replacement original pellet types in case you are want to go that route. That's not a problem. They are available online. It's not a big deal. Let's just shrink this a little bit on here. There we go. Okay, so now we can start putting the smoke unit back together. Now there is some putty that does go around here to seal this up a little bit better. I don't have any of that. I've never had any of it. I've never used it. It seems to work fine without it, so I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to put anything. I suppose you could put JB Weld in there or something, or some kind of heat-proof cement or something if you really wanted to. But what I'm concerned about is just making sure that the plunger is clean so that it moves freely up and down within the cylinder. And it does. So we're going to put this all back together. There we go. So that's all back together. We'll feed the wire around here so that it's out of the way of everything. No more bare spots touching. We're good. There we go. Perfect. So, make sure this, I still don't like this connection, but I'm just going to live with it right now. Or, you know what? It's pretty bad. Let's take it off. Okay, so we fixed that connection up. That's looking good now, much cleaner. So we can start putting this thing back together, because that's it. Cleaned off the brushes, the brush plate, the armature, lubed up the little shaft on this side, lubed up the bearing plate, cleaned up all of the old gunk or whatever was in there. The dry gears are all lubricated now. The short that was in the smoke chamber is fixed. E-unit is all cleaned up. It should be ready to go. So actually what we'll do first, just to make sure before we go ahead and put shells back on, I'm going to set up a test track, drop this on it, and see what we got. So let's do that now. Actually, before I forget, one of the other things this locomotive was missing was there's a spacer that's supposed to sit here on the eccentric crank. So I looked through my parts bin, and I don't have any. But what I do have are these little bushings that are out of a screen door hinge, I believe. So I think these are the right size to work on the eccentric crank, and I'm going to check by looking at the spare I have here. and it fits over. So all I got to do is trim this back a little bit, and I have a spacer again. That's going to be sweet. So basically, from this lip down is exactly what I need to put back on here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I'm just going to put this in a vise and get my Dremel tool and just cut off that flange. Okay, so we've got these little bushings cut, and if my no calculations are correct, they should fit on here and we should have some proper spacers. So let's see if we actually did it. Let's get back these off. So all you have to do is take off the eccentric crank on this one, and the spacer is going to go on this side. Just like that. And we do have, yep, we got the crank poking through so we can line it up into the wheel. So my guesstimation was correct. Perfect. So now let's put the screw back in and bolt the whole thing back together. Okay, so after a little bit of sanding, we got these spacers sized properly. So now this thing runs absolutely smooth. At the low speeds even, there's no drag. So this 2055 is ready to go back on the tracks. Newly cleaned up, some homemade spare parts on it. We've got a replacement smoke unit on it. Oh, and another thing that was done off camera is the gaskets for the smoke unit itself. So all I used here was one of these felt pads that you see on the bottom of chairs, and then a thinner felt gasket to lay on top of that to take up the extra slack. So this is all good to go back together and throw out on the big track. So I'm going to do that now, and we'll see you over on the layout. Okay, so we've got the 2055 on the track. Just to go over that little checklist one more time, we took off the shell, we checked the brushes, brush plate, armature, wiring, bearing plate, gears lubricated, and the E-unit. Everything checked out fine. We installed our new spacers that we built out of some spare parts. We also replaced the felt little washer things for the smoke unit and replaced the smoke element in the smoke unit itself. So it is all good to go. We've bench tested it. It runs perfectly fine. So now we're going to send it around the big layout and just enjoy it for a bit. Alright, so that is it. That's the 2055 all back up to snuff, running around the track perfectly fine, and looking real sharp with those pre-war tenders. So guys, once again, thanks for tuning in and watching this with me. I hope you found this enjoyable and fun, maybe learned a couple things from this one. I really enjoyed building these parts out of some spare material I had kicking around, and I hope to do a little bit more of that kind of work in the future. So don't forget to do all the YouTube stuff, the subscribe, notification bell, hit the like, all of that fun stuff. And thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next video. Ciao for now.